right, welcome to the podcast. Let's get started for realsies. Back in the 1980s, when California surf culture was raw, fast, and a little dangerous, yeah, it used to be dangerous to be a photographer of surfing. You'd show up on the beach, a bunch of guys in black wetsuits would start flexing, like, hey homie, you better back off, especially at spots like Oxnard, Santa Cruz, all over California. The Lokes kept their spots under wraps, and if you were a photographer, you had to watch your back. Well, Jimmy Metyko had just moved from Texas. Maybe he didn't know all the rules yet, but he thought it'd be a good idea to follow around Tom Curren. Curren was about 16, 17 years old. Nobody knew he was going to be world champion. Oh wait, hold that. We all knew he was going to be world champion. The guy was unbelievable from day one. Sure, it didn't hurt that his dad, Pat Curren, was also a legend, and his mom, Janine Curren, another legend. She not only supported him, drove him around to different contests, she literally made his wetsuits, okay? Thanks, Mom. Anyways, so we got a killer show today. We're going to interview Jimmy Metyko, and we're going to be talking Tom Curren stories in the 80s. Let's get started. Oh yeah, and by the way, Jimmy Metyko is a great photographer. He could shoot anything and make it look good, but luckily for us, he decided to shoot surfing. Here we go. I'd like to thank Jimmy for coming on podcast. How do you pronounce your last name?
I grew up with it being pronounced any way you want, and I'm not one of those people that get upset when someone pronounces it wrong, but the correct way is Metyko.
Okay, awesome. Jimmy Metyko, and congratulations on this incredible book that you made here.
Thank you, Josh. It's been a lot of fun.
Tell me about the process of actually making it. Was it something that you wanted to do for a long time, and how long did it take for it actually to get copies in your hands?
Really good question. It actually, I did want to do it myself and self-publish it, and I have been wanting to do it for probably about 10 years, and I would get a certain amount of momentum going, and then other things in life would come into play, and I would put it on the back burner. And it wasn't until I connected with Rizzoli, I did that through Jamie Brissick, that I was put on a timeline that I had to adhere to, and then the support and knowledge. And through that, I was able to complete it. It probably took from start to finish close to when I actually had a copy in my hand. From when you start submitting your concepts to Rizzoli to when it's actually completed, probably 2 years. It's an arduous process. I wanted to quit many times. The hardest part, Josh, was editing and picking the images that were going to go into the book. Is for every image in the book, there's 100 images that were not picked, and each one of those images is kind of like your little babies. That especially the old imagery where they're slides and they're tangible and you hold them. It's not digital. It was a tough part. It was probably one of the hardest things I've done in photography was curate and narrow down the images cull them down for 305 pages, which seems like a lot of pages, but it ends up being, if you really did all the images you wanted to, it'd be like a 2,000 page book, and it'd be ridiculous.
It sounds like you might have a sequel coming up.
Well, who knows if anybody, I've been doing a lot of shooting in the winter times, and I have a lot of really images from probably since 2017 till now, but and the surfers are phenomenal now, and I would say every bit as good and every bit as exciting to shoot now than it was back then. But just with the birth of Channel Islands and Tommy coming of age, it's kind of hard to kind of top that. So would I want to do another book? Sure. Photographers want to see their stuff printed, and a coffee table book is the ultimate. But what would the story be? The story was just so good with Tommy and Al and Channel Islands and that whole crew.
Well, let's get into that story. Set the scene for me. How old were you? You moved to town.
I was 19. I actually came in the winter of 1979, and I came to attend Brooks Institute photography school, which most people in 805, even though it's no longer around, know of it, but outside of 805 they may not know of Brooks. But it was premier photography school at that time, and it was quite a big deal. And I came out really with the sole purpose of shooting surfing and being one of the photographers for Surfer and surfing. And that was my goal, as long, with going to school. And I was going to be successful at that no matter what. I was a pretty determined kid, but I just had no idea what I was walking into. I don't think anybody did. I knew Tommy was there, and I had saw him the summer before at the U.S. where I was competing, and watching him, it was in Texas where I was from, and watching him surf our waves at just another level, I realized that as good a surfer as I was in my own mind, I was never going to be, at that level. And so in my mind, what was the point? And I was already in photography, and I just kind of made that switch. It probably was happening for about a year or two, but after seeing Tommy, I was like, okay. And I'm a surfer. I've always been a surfer. Surfing's always been a big part of my life. But as far as, a profile, as far as trying to contribute back to the sport of surfing, I saw that photography was the way to go. Certainly wasn't going to be my surfing. And so I knew of Tommy, and when I arrived, I did not know Tom. I didn't know anybody, and through certain situations, I got to know Sam and Matt George. I got to know Kim Robinson, who was the manager at Channel Islands, and from there just started networking and closing in the gap of everybody, and in a very short amount of time, because everybody pretty much was trying to make a name for themselves and coming up and being a part of the surf scene, which was really centric down to Southern California. And so everybody was kind of in the same place as I was, trying to make a name for themselves and build up a reputation and be noticed by the magazines down south. So we all kind of fed off each other.
Take me through that. What was your first meeting like with Tommy?
I don't have a super clear. I remember seeing him surf for the first time in South Padre Island in Texas. I don't have this super clear image of the first time I met him. The first time I saw him surf in California was at Rincon. And I was going to school and was really trying to figure out the lay of the land. And I think Tommy was surfing Hammonds after school. And this is kind of funny. I didn't know how to get down to Hammonds. And I would drive to Butterfly Lane and on really big days and look towards Hammonds, and then I'd drive around and I'd end up, below Hammonds and go, this could be Hammonds. It's not as big as I saw, from up on Butterfly, looking down from Butterfly Lane. And so it was actually months before I figured out how to get to Hammonds. So when I first got there, I probably could have shot a lot more at Tom if I knew how to get to Hammonds, as funny as that sounds now. But I think what Sam and Matt knew Tom, Kim Robinson knew Tom, of course, with Channel Islands, and I think we just started seeing each other at the beach and got to know each other like all surfers do. And then Tommy didn't drive yet, so I started to drive him and the rest of the crew. There was a kid that Tom was best friends with back then that used to surf, Shane O'Farrell. And Tom's mom used to drive him everywhere, and still in the early 1980, 81, she still was driving to all the contests. But when there weren't contests, then we went and like on the weekends we would drive down south, whether it was depending on time of year, Ventura, Malibu, or up north to Central Coast and stuff. And then after school we would my school was kind of different. It didn't like get out at 3, so but you kind of worked on your own, and you showed up to class for once a week, and then got your assignment and worked on it all week. But we kind of like when Tom and Shane got out of school, we would go hit Rincon or wherever we thought the surf was good, and it kind of built from that. And we were both pretty driven. You know, he was driven just to go surf, and I was driven to take pictures. So it was a real, you know, symbiotic situation that worked out well.
Sounds like you guys had a lot of fun together. Do you have any like stories that stick out that might be kind of funny?
Oh, probably. I think probably the main takeaway is we were all young, and we were all like excited to be like trying to Tommy build his surf career, me build my photography career, and we were pretty focused on that. And the whole time, we all had these goals, and we all helped each other with each goals. But like, you know, a group of any surfers, you know, sometimes it was just Tom and I shooting, sometimes it was Sam, Matt, Tom, and then everybody just grew. It was all fun. Everybody was having it. The main takeaway is everybody was just having a good time. And of course, you know, we got on each other's nerves, and when you show up somewhere and it's 2 foot blown out, you start fighting on the, you know, on the road back because you're pissed off. And then when it's good, everybody's, you know, happy, you know, just like a group of any surfers. And it just reminded me of any group of surfers that I've been a part of growing up or wherever. It's just the same kind of dynamic. And we were always playing practical jokes on each other, especially when we started hanging out with Willie Morris, Willie and Jamie, and Willie's brother Steve, and a guy named Dino from down there from the valley, Dino Bartoli. A lot of practical jokes we would constantly try to pull on each other. A big thing was we were always caravanning, so a big thing was storing food in each other's car. A big thing we'd always do is whenever we go to the restaurant, if somebody would go into the restroom, we would get the waiter. We would tell them it's their birthday, and then by the time they would come out of the restroom, they would have, you know, a group of waiters singing "Happy Birthday," and we would do that like, you know, every other day, and just, you know, all innocent stuff, nothing, you know, major. Willie Morris was a big practical joker, and you had to be careful. If you got him too good, you always knew you were going to have, he was going to get you back. And so sometimes the anticipation of him retaliating was worse than anything that was actually done.
Classic. I had a buddy who got me on a pretty bad practical joke. We went surfing, and I left my board in his car, and when he returned the board, he put a roadkill dead skunk in it. So So when I opened my board bag, I was like, why is my board so heavy, you know?
Hanging out with Davey Smith, he had a little more edge to his practical jokes. It wasn't as bad as a skunk, but they used to dip Skull. There was a guy he used to go up north to Alam and stuff with, John Schuyler, and I'd never done Skull, and John had a VW van, and we got to Halam, and it was like 2 foot and blown out. And so they taught me into doing Skull for the first time, knowing that I would get, you know, completely like green faced and sick. And then put me in the back seat of the van, and you know the road, how windy the roads of Lama, and he made sure the van was like throwing me around extra hard. And I remember by the time we got back to one, we had to pull over, and I had to puke basically. But that was, you know, that was about as bad as it got.
Yeah, it's always pick on the photographer the most, right?
No, I don't know. It wasn't pick on the photographer the most. It was definitely, I didn't grow up there. And so there was a learning curve for me. And so I was naive in a lot of ways. And as I was figuring out kind of some basic things that everybody knew from growing up in that area, you know, they would give me a hard time about that. But basically, as I started to figure everything out, that kind of waned to the side. But it's everybody involved, from Al and his wife Terry and on down. Everybody was really good, group of people to be with, and everybody knew that the surf was really good through that period, and everybody knew that Tommy was in Santa Barbara, especially knew that Tommy was going to be a world champion and was kind of vicariously living through what he was doing, and was really proud of Tommy. And it was a big deal every time you'd hear he'd win a contest, first amateur, and eventually when he got on the circuit, it was like you won. And it was a real community thing, and especially a real Channel Islands thing. And being kind of involved in all that and seeing it firsthand, that was probably the most exciting part. And there really wasn't, there was so much surf, there really wasn't any idle memories. We were always doing something, always chasing surf. And coming from Texas, kind of an interesting thing is, back then, before there was any kind of forecasting, I lived in Houston, the closest waves were an hour away. You drove to the beach not knowing whether there were waves or not. And quite often you get there, it was 1 foot slop, and you were happy because you just driven an hour and that was as good as it was going to be. I can remember being in Santa Barbara, and the first time we had some good waves, and then it was flat, and I was going, God, I wish there were waves. And somebody said, well, I know 30 minutes from here where it's probably 6 feet. And I'm like, you're kidding me, and nobody had any desire to go because it wasn't in Santa Barbara and the surf wasn't coming to them. And I was like, man, let's go. So kind of started that Ventura on a south swell, Ventura when a swell is missing Santa Barbara, heading to Ventura side of it all. And I think with Tommy, that kind of put him in a lot more waves through a period that was already full of waves. And then when it wasn't, and we would get up and we would head to, on a moment's notice, on the weekends mostly, we would head to Central Coast. And we got Morro Bay, Cambria, we got all that whole area really, really good. It's really hard to get good with the winds and clean surf, but we would catch the offshore winds in many, many good days when Santa Barbara was flat. So I think it was kind of going back to my coming from a wave-star place like Texas, and then moving to Santa Barbara. I had the attitude of let's hop in the car and go, when a lot of the people just didn't do that at that time. And so that I think really helped, and helped with Tommy surfing, and certainly helped with getting a lot of photographs. All the times at Clara that we got waves when it was completely flat in Santa Barbara. And it was really good. It was really good back then. The sandbars were always good.
That's such a critical time in a surfer's development as a professional, like before they turn pro. Maybe you could talk about like what his personality was like back then, and just how special that was.
Just out of being, Tom, actually, when I met Tom, if being a Grom technically is 16, you're a Grom, and 17, you're not. When I met him, he was a Grom, and I was, coming from Texas and wanting to be a part of all that, everything I did was exciting to me. So I photographed absolutely everything because it was all cool to me. Where some of the guys that grew up there were kind of blasé about everything because they took it for granted. And so the point there is I had the stoke of a Grom, and I think that's the way everybody kind of was. Everybody at that time living in Santa Barbara, if you wanted to be part of the contest scene, the pro scene, you were a little bit of an outsider. You were kind of breaking ground because everything in the late 70s and the beginning of the 80s was kind of that classic Santa Barbara single fin 7.2 rounded pin point style surfing, and it wasn't really about progressing at the level of what the Australians or the Wines were doing on the pro circuit. And So as a group, we were all focused on that, and we wanted to all be a part of it. Al wanted to be a part of it as far as being a shaper, Tommy and Willie Morris and Davey and the gang as surfers, and me as a photographer. So we were all kind of on a mission. It wasn't just me, and we all fed off each other. So it was just all about being surf stoked. There wasn't that much more to it, and everybody, like I said, it was a good group of people, and it was just constant waves, and we're perpetually stoked.
I'm looking at your book right now, and there's so many amazing photos in here. It really does show it's cool because there's guys on single fins and there's guys, on twin fins. It's like you really captured a moment, not only of Tom developing as a pro, but like a moment in the transition, I'd say, in surfing history.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Josh. And that part was kind of exciting. Since like the late 60s, that whole 70s period, all you did was see boards change. And every year or 2 years, you're kind of going, okay, what's next? And so this progression from a single fin, twin fins, that evolution of twin fins probably, if I remember right, started in the late 70s. So it was already there when I got there. But still, you either rode a single fin or a twin fin. And then when the thruster came, the thruster wasn't this. When the thruster first came on the market, Simon, and then when Al started doing it, it wasn't like it is the thruster today. It was like, okay, we're just going to add another fin. And a lot of people were skeptical. And slowly it caught on and got momentum and became, what it is today. Still, professionally speaking, high performance speaking, the board of choice. But right, watching all that kind of happen, and I remember shooting Tommy on it. I don't really recall noticing the transition of Tommy's style from a twin to a thruster as it was happening, because he was just developing so rapidly. But looking back through the photos, how Tommy surfed on a twin and how he surfed on a thruster is very evident. His turns went very square, very explosive, as opposed to very smooth California twin fin style. The beauty about Tommy back down on twin fin is he was just so smooth, it can go anywhere on a wave so easily. But once you put the thruster underneath him, it just turned into power turning and square turns, and you see all, and straight up slams off the lips, which were a little harder to do in twin fins. You just see all that through the imagery, and it's pretty exciting, being a part of that.
He captured like not only the waves but the people. Like some of the photography of the people is just as good, if not better than the surfing.
I think that's a product of two things. I think it's a product of going to Brooks and having to focus on that a lot, and then the other one is, I think, like I said before, I was so stoked to be a part of what I used to only look at in the magazines, and now I'm here creating images for the magazines. Everywhere I turn my camera, I would shoot. And back then, a lot of the photographers would shoot the surf, but they would never turn around and shoot, the other direction. And when the waves were flat, I would find, things to go shoot that had to do with surfing. I mean, it's just like nonstop. I was like a kid in a candy store, coming from Texas.
Yeah, did you feel like, obviously everyone knew that, there was that momentum behind Tommy. It must have just felt magical, like, having Al Merrick, who was just such an incredible shaper and person, and Tommy and the whole team there, and you must have just been walking on air.
Yeah, it was, you had to put, I'm trying to put myself back into that time. The first year or so was hard, just trying to get to know everybody. And every time something good happened, whether I got shots at Tommy at Rincon, or I met somebody, or You know, somebody like Willie Morris. I remember when I first met him, and we said, hey, we need to go shoot. You know, little things like that were all just were unbelievable things that kind of like perpetuated my energy and reinforced my desire to do it. By around the second year, well into the second year, things started to, I felt like, you know, I was part of one of the gang, and we were, I was part of everything that was happening and going and recording it all. And at that point, it really felt good. But at first it was a little awkward because I didn't know anybody. And I spent my summers down south since I was about 14 surfing. I would go to San Diego, North County. And the furthest I think I ever surfed was Malibu. I never didn't know much when I moved to Santa Barbara about anything beyond Malibu. I knew there's Rincon and the ranch, and as I said, I knew of Tommy, and I even knew of Channel Islands. There's a guy I looked up to back home, rode Channel Islands boards back when Al first came into. I think Al was in 1980. He had already been shaping for about 10 years, so I knew of it, but it wasn't a big brand yet. So other than those, the ranch, Rincon, Tommy, Al, I really didn't know much about Santa Barbara. So it was kind of amazing going there and kind of having to piece it all together and figure it all out. And having there not been a situation where there was kind of a photographer and somebody like Tommy working that area back then, it was all kind of new, you know, like figuring out to go to, the Ventura area when Santa Barbara's not breaking on certain north swells and definitely on south swells. That wasn't being done much. And, you know, back then you didn't even go to Oxnard to shoot. And even when I first started going to Santa Clara, it was sketchy. Yeah, you know, C Street was pretty sketchy. I mean, it's not like it was. Hollywood was the sketchiest. I mean, you basically just didn't go. I knew a guy that was a surfer back in Hollywood, and we used to run into him at Super Twos of all places, and a friend of mine, Dana McCorkles, was a good friend of his, and we'd all get to know each other. And he says, look, Jimmy, he goes, if you want to shoot Hollywood and all that, he goes, I'm going to invite you to one of our parties, and you come there and show some of your slides at Tommy and up there and get to know the guys, and they'll like you, and then they'll let you shoot. And then we walked away, and my Dana and I just looked at each other and said, no way. You know, it was pretty rough back then. And Dana's a pretty big guy, and we just saw ourselves showing up at that party, starting to show photos, everybody drunk. You know, it just, you know, being a photographer, that wasn't a good thing at that point in time. Matter of fact, every time I step on the beach at like Silver Strand or Hollywood or whatever, I'm always a little bit nervous. Just built in from that Tim Curren area, and it was a whole different world. C Street wasn't quite as bad, but it definitely was different. Back then in the fairgrounds, Grateful Dead would be playing there all the time. You could, you know, it was kind of like straight out of a 70s, you know, how you would imagine it to be. In the distance, you could hear Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead playing. The Hells Angels did the security for those shows. There was no gentrification to C Street. It was dirt parking lots, and you know, it's not like you went there felt threatened, but there was always an element that didn't want you there. They didn't, and it wasn't just being a photographer. They just didn't want colored wetsuits and bright boards and anybody who's trying to be a professional surfer. I think one interesting thing about Tom is everybody was so amazed by his talent that he got a pass surfing in a lot of the areas that they looked they frowned on anybody, as the phrase back then was, going pro, in quotation marks. And he got a free pass, and by association, I got a free pass a lot. And places like the ranch, I didn't shoot. I shot a couple of times, so it was small time, and I'm glad I did. And I put a few of those images in the book because it's kind of historical, young Tommy surfing the ranch. But for the most part, when I went to the ranch, I went to surf and saw, unbelievable ranch and never shot. Shell Islands, I never took photos, just out of respect to the area. And there were so many waves that you didn't have to through that era. It was just nonstop. Kind of compare it to this winter, where it was an El Nino winter and there's some really big days. All those in between days when there wasn't surf, there was still good surf back then. It wouldn't have been as big as the big swell days, but it still would have been 6 feet and clean and perfect somewhere. And so it's like every time you said, okay, when I get off work, when I get through a school, whatever, I'm going to go surf, you put your board in your car and there were waves. And you weren't sitting around waiting for weeks. It was pretty good yesterday evening at Rincon.
Oh, did you shoot at Rincon yesterday?
No, I actually, Josh, I live outside of Austin. I just had a couple. It's a lot of people don't know that, and I had a couple of people text me saying, "Are you going to be at Rincon in the evening?" Yesterday they texted me, and I was like,
I thought it might be good. But hey, I want to get back to this idea. You kind of blew my mind, to be honest. Surfing C Street and being able to hear Jerry Garcia at the same time. I mean, come on.
Well, it's not like you're sitting there like you had the radio on full blast of your car. You could just hear the distance, strains of the Grateful Dead. Yeah, no, that was, yeah, and it was. I think the biggest difference is it was kind of a wild place, and I don't necessarily mean wild like Old West wild. I mean more. You felt like you're leaving concrete civilization, going to kind of like when you go to Halam or something, because nothing was paved. It was dirt, parking lots, and you'd pull off the street, pull into a dirt parking lot, and head out and go as far as you could. And if you wanted to, stables or whatever, you'd park and walk, and it just felt like a whole different place.
Yeah, you had to mind your P's and Q's too, because back then, if you pissed somebody off, they could punch you in the face, and it wasn't like you'd call the cops.
Yeah, one thing about me is I've always been kind of disarming because I'm not looking for that. You know how some guys, they get in trouble and they never say anything, but they just kind of have that attitude about them, like they want to get in trouble, if that makes sense.
Well, they have that like chip on their shoulder, you're saying.
Exactly. I always, to me, the last thing I wanted to do was get in an altercation with somebody. I wanted to shoot surf photos. And it's not to say that I didn't have people come up and say, cameras aren't cool here. Strangely enough, most of the times I got harassed, Willie Morris was with me. So there was this situation where I was shooting a pro, which was a big negative, and they would come up to me, and just about every time, coincidentally, Willie would be getting out of the water and walk up. And Willie was not he wasn't an aggressive person at all. He was a super laid back, nice guy, but he was big. And when he would walk, and he was real quick witted, he could out talk anybody. And so people would just back off pretty quick. And that's pretty much the way it was. There was a lot of bark and no bite. And I pretty much avoided the areas that in Oxnard, it would be a lot more serious at that time.
Every photographer needs to have a friend like Willie Morris, right?
Yeah, no, and Willie, I don't want to give the impression that he was this big enforcer. He wasn't. He was a really laid back, cool guy. He was just big, and quick witted. And somebody would start to, once I can remember it happened several times. Somebody would be giving me a hard time, and then he would come up and the person would kind of get a little nervous and start trying to rationalize why they're being aggressive by, why cameras aren't cool here. And Willie would just, rebut, anything he said immediately and make the person feel stupid for ever even, saying anything.
Exactly, because when you're shooting somewhere that has a lot of locals, it's like you got one eye on the water and one eye behind you, right?
Well, yeah, you're walking around with how much, money and camera equipment, but the other side of that is you're walking around with something that is you wouldn't want to get hit with, so you're walking around with something that you can defend yourself with.
I always felt like, as a photographer too, it's like you kind of want respect, because I feel like we're important. I mean, we're literally documenting surf history, like the photos you got in your book or the photos that we get, it's like that's surf history. And it's sad that like you can't just shoot people anywhere, in my opinion. But do you feel like that what we do is kind of important in a way?
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. I think my driving force is, as a surfer, I love watching really good surfing. And as a photographer, as a filmer, still photographer, you're sitting there looking through your viewfinder, seeing some of the best surfers do some of their best surfing. And more so than anybody could possibly see in social media or back in that era, in the magazines and in surf movies. And it's kind of like, we used to live back then, before there was so much a proliferation of video and film. You saw a new surf movie a few times a year at the most, and that was a big thing. And so here on a daily basis, I was watching a surf movie firsthand, front row seat. And when shooting from the water, you're really front row seat. And if you just, as a surfer, and just loving to see good surfing, that was probably was enough right there. Now, we want to have our stuff seen by everybody else. You shoot in order to share all this. You're not just doing it for your own hedonistic, gratification of watching great surfing. And you want to share it and show it to other people. And that, to me, that's a pretty exciting thing, So for me, with still images, I know you shoot more film. When somebody looks at what you shot, you're really proud to share it. And you're actually sharing something they wouldn't have seen otherwise, right? Most of the time. Especially back in the era that I was, there was that one of the big days back at the end of 2023, like the 30th of December or something, when Michael February was out and Connor and a lot of the Challenge Island guys were out. Every 10 feet was a photographer filming or shooting. So there's every ride, no exaggeration, probably had 30 people filming. Back in the early 80s, there definitely were other photographers. I don't think they were as focused on getting into magazines and being as prolific as I was. But most of the time when you're at the beach, you were the only one shooting. And there were no iPhones. Occasionally somebody would pull out a camera and shoot a couple of shots before they went surfing. But most of the time, 95% of the time, I was the only one shooting wherever we went. And so literally I was taking images of like Tommy that would not have been seen otherwise. And that you say it's important. That was important to me. And yeah, obviously it's important historically to be able to share that. Does that make sense?
Thank you for taking those photos.
Well, it was totally self-indulgent. I just loved doing it. I still love doing it. I love doing it now more than I did back then. Maybe because I appreciate it more, but I haven't lost the stoke whatsoever. Probably the worst thing about shooting right now is I do shoot digital. It solves a lot of problems that the old days with analog and film had. Is one is you can shoot as many shots as you want. You don't have to worry about film conservation, and you only have 5 rolls with 36 shots each, and that's the max you can shoot until you know, like, so if you run out, you run out. Well, with digital, you can shoot till you know, as long as you have backup batteries and cards, you can shoot forever. And I enjoy that.
All these photos in here. Tell me about this shoot you did with Al, where he's got this great handlebar mustache and he's looking straight at you in the eye, your camera, and he's got this beautiful blank that he's holding.
That, I think, if it's the one I'm thinking where he's kind of holding it perpendicular to his body, yeah, that's the first time I shot Al. And so I mentioned Kim Robinson before, who's the manager at Channel Islands, and I got this request from Art Brewer at Surfer. They needed shots of Al, and I did not know Al at that time, and Kim set it up for me. That was, I believe, in 1980. So it was, I'd probably seen Al at the beach, probably talked to him, probably was part of a group hanging out in the Rincon parking lot afterwards, but really didn't know him. And I went to Kim and I said, you know, I have to shoot this for, I can't remember if it was Surfer Magazine. Yeah, Art Brewer. And he goes, okay, I'll set it up for you. He goes, but you know that he does not like to shoot with anybody from Brooks, because I guess he was at that time, you're always looking for something to shoot. And the surfers in the past that went to Brooks said, well, I'll go shoot Al. And the other thing is this is before shaping machines or anything. Al was basically the shaping machine. So when you stopped him, you stopped production. And furthermore, the camera equipment, the sensitivity of the film didn't allow you to go in and shoot handheld without extra lighting in those dark black shaping bays. And so you had to have a strobe, and you had to bounce it off the ceiling, and it wasn't automatic. You had to calculate the light fall off. So if you pointed the strobe at the ceiling, you had to calculate how far to the ceiling, how far from the ceiling to him, what the light fall off is, and then you had to set your strobe intensity and your corresponding settings on the camera. So this whole time, all this math is going through your head, and you're nervous, and you know you don't know what you're doing. You know, you barely know what you're doing, and Al's just staring at you. You know, and in your mind you're going, okay, I'm stopped. He's not shaping. He's going to have to work late to catch up for this time. And the funny thing about Al is every single time when you start shooting him, he kind of has that look, and then as he relaxes and warm up, and as you relax and warm up and you start shooting, you know, it starts becoming fun. He starts laughing and gregarious, and it's a great experience. But it always kind of starts out with that deadpan look, where he's just looking at you like, hurry up. So, you know, I was just a kid who didn't know what he was doing, and I got lucky and got a couple of shots that worked, and I had to send the roll of film undeveloped to the magazines, and it was a long time before I was in the office with Jeff Devine at Surfer, going through my file, just looking to see what they had saved, and that's the first time I saw the developed roll that I shot that time.
You didn't see the results.
Well, with black and white, you could develop it the same day and you can see results. I think the biggest difference between shooting film back then and digital is digital, you go out and you just capture millions and millions of bits of information, way more information than you need, and then you bring it back to your computer and you process it, and you determine where it's you do your own dodging and burning. You control a dynamic range that's 3 times as large. You get built into it is detail in the shadows and detail in the highlights. You don't have to worry about any of that. You decide whether it's black and white or color. Back in film, where you had about 3 stops of difference between your highlights and your shadows, you had to build that and put information into the shooting, and then what you got was what you had. So to put that more easier to understand terms, if you're not a photographer, if you're shooting somebody with the sun behind you, and the person in the front is going to be completely dark, you have to then either bounce light into them or have a strobe and put light into them in order for them to see the detail of them. Where in digital you don't have to. You can shoot somebody with the sun directly behind them, and the cameras are so incredible now that they'll capture detail and information in the shadow and in the bright sun behind. Did I say that where it made sense?
Yeah, you did. This shot of Al though, it almost looks biblical to me. I don't know why. Maybe it's the framing. Maybe it's knowing what his career turned out to be. But it's like, it literally looks like he's like the Jesus of surfing, holding the Holy Grail, which is like this surfboard, and he's got like the foam dust on his arms. He's shirtless. It's kind of an incredible image, I gotta say.
Can I say that at that point in time, getting that image was completely luck. I was stretching my skill level, and then I was on a hope and a prayer, and trying. The funny thing about strobes back then is they often didn't work, and especially the battery packs in them. So often, like I remember we climbed up the cliffs above Rincon once. We didn't drive up, but we climbed up. There was about 4 or 5 of us to shoot a shot. And when I get up there, my strobe didn't work. The battery didn't work. So you can plug it in, but there's no plug up there. So you constantly had to deal with equipment issues like that, especially when you were having to bring light with the strobe into a situation like a shaping room. And just the anxiety of shooting shots like that, unless you did it every single day, and remember I was just learning, is tremendous. And even then I went on a shoot once with a guy who was a pro guy in LA about that time, and who complete command of his craft. He was sweating the whole time. That's just what photography was. I don't want to say photography now is easy. It's not, but there was a lot more to it. Now when you get into digital photography, and I think this is where I was leading to before when I forgot where I was going, is you end up spending like not just hours but days, like making something perfect on your computer, on your desktop. Whereas back then, when you shot that shot, you had to do all the work shooting the shot. Afterwards, you'd send it off to Kodak, or maybe if it was black and white, you spent some time dodging and burning in the darkroom. But you were limited as to what you could do. So basically, when you shot that shot, it was basically done. And in that sense, back then it was a lot easier. There's nothing more frustrating than to shoot 10,000 images on a really good day and then come back to your desktop and have an hour to go through them and then turn around and have to send them off, because you have to weed down 10,000 images to what the client needs, and then you have to process them yourself on the fly, all within an hour. And you're not doing as good as you need to. And if it's a personal thing, then you end where you do it on your own time, then you're spending days on one photo, and that days you could be doing something else. So it's a give and take.
How's this show photo of Janine? You really captured her. I don't know. A lot of people don't know how critical she was in Tom's career.
Yeah, no. I don't want to say they're. It's just like with Al. Both Al and Tommy would have reached what they reached without each other, but that's not what happened. They did have their symbiotic relationship, and together. That is what happened, and they did great things. Well, same kind of thing with Janine. Would Tommy have still been a world champion without Janine? Probably, but the way it happened was, that's hard to say. I take that back. Maybe he wouldn't have been without Janine, but either way, she was probably the most, in my mind, what I saw firsthand, the most influential person within his life. Just, if nothing else, just being the kind of one of the first, type of surf moms that existed at that level. Not only, like when I first saw Tommy surf, she loaded up Joe and Anna and Tom and drove all the way to Texas. They drove to Texas when I saw him surf in the summer of 1979. And then the year before that, I think they drove. I was talking to Tommy's brother, Joe Curren. I think she did the same thing, drove all the way to Cape Hatteras for the U.S. the year before in 78. And so she was constantly driving Tommy up and down the coast for contests. When there wasn't a director for the WSA, because sometimes things weren't as organized as they needed to be, she would become the director just to make sure that the contest would happen. It's pretty. She was, looking back, she had a full plate. 3 kids. Pat was there maybe the first year or so before he moved to Baja. And after that, she was, running the show.
She's one of the most amazing people I've ever met. Janine Curren, Tom's mom. She did some babysitting for me for my little kids, and she literally made my daughter a dress, just by hand.
Oh. Well, it just think about. It's not like she's the first sport parent, but she is kind of a archetype for one of the first surf, parents, as opposed to sports. But, obviously Tom was pretty special and he was winning, but you're putting a lot of energy and you don't know where it's going to go. It's easy to say, and we all did feel like Tommy was going to be a world champion. But if you're the person putting out the money for the events, for the travel and the hotel and the gas and the time, you don't know where it's going to go. The professional surfing wasn't a money sport when all this started. I think Tommy's first contract with OP and Rip Curl at that time was Landmark. But when all this started for them, if you think about it, it's not like, training to be, one of the top surfers. If all the surf companies today or 5 years ago or 10 years ago thought you were the next big thing, all that energy they would put into you, that didn't exist back then. It was pretty much just out of love and as a parent.
Yeah, no, she's incredible. Let me ask you a question here. You've got this beautiful backlit photo of George Greeno.
That's actually not George Greeno.
Okay, right. It says it's not George Greeno. It talks about the shortboard revolution in the late '60s. It's Paul Gross.
Yeah, equally as an interesting person. Well, the thing about Greeno at that time, was every bit as much a surf star and kind of iconic as he is today. I mean, he was already there, dating back, to putting a camera on his back, kneeboarding, and shooting those early tube shots, the shortboard revolution that we know about with McTavish and Net Young and all that. I mean, by that time, he was already an icon. And I didn't shoot him because right then in the early 80s, sailboarding was kind of coming into play. And at that time, a lot of surfers went into sailboarding, but there was kind of a schism. You either got into sailboarding or you hated it. And I was a surfer pure in and pure out. I did not want to be involved with sailboarding. And at that time, Greeno was experimenting with sailboarding. He wasn't surfing. He wasn't kneeboarding, to be. And so I did not know Greeno, but I had good friends that were good friends of his, so I could easily connect with them. But I saw no need to. Looking back, I wish I would have. I mean, shots of him tinkering, making some of his sailboarding, on those channel wind days in the channel. I mean, I'd love to, looking back, have known that I photographed all that. But back then, that was like, no, that's the sailboarders are the enemy. That's kind of how the division kind of played out. The one time that I saw him once at El Cap, and it was a really good El Cap, and it was in the parking lot, and he was just leaving, and I think David Pu'u and somebody back then. David Pu'u wasn't a photographer; he was a surfer, and David Pu'u and I forgot who else was out. So one of those other North County guys at that time, and the waves were really good. And he was just when he was walking in, going to his car, he had a mat. So I missed. I would have loved to shoot him on a mat. I love mat surfing. I think it's insane how fast they go. As you know, there's a couple of guys at Rincon. One specific, I cannot think of his name. God, that's going to bother me. I can't think of his name. But that's my experience with Greeno. And Paul Gross at that time was definitely a Greeno aficionado, and that's that image of him. I wish it was Greeno. I wish I would have had, as a photographer, you like to kind of collect, like, oh, I shot him, oh, I shot that person, or I shot, Kim Merrick back in the day. And that's another person we haven't even touched on, is the simultaneous rise to being number one woman in the surf world. Kim, at the same time Tommy. Everything was kind of Kim and Tommy. It wasn't just Tommy alone, and it was kind of something I don't talk about enough. Is that when everybody was kind of in the middle of that rise and excited to be a part of it, it was the fact that both Tommy and Kim were going out there winning all these amateur contests and ultimately winning world titles.
Yeah, and I mean the waves. I mean, you had the canvas. It was you were there for 1983 when that was an El Nino year, and the waves were perfect, which we talked about a lot too. So
one thing I didn't talk about in the book is that, to make a long story short, I climbed up the cliffs at Halama to try to get a better angle. This is long before you had drones and everything. And I was on the edge of the cliff where one wrong move and I would fall down, 40 feet, whatever the distance is, to the rocks. And I set my camera and tripod up and turned around, or sitting down, perched, carefully twisted around to get my film. And as I came back around, my tripod started to lean over. And if I would have reached for it, I would have gone over too. So I had to let it fall. And it all just hit the rocks and exploded and everything. And so basically my camera was destroyed. Believe it or not, my lens, which was the standard lens of that time that you used, was a Century 650. It actually was sharper after. It was sharp already. It was even sharper after that. It had one little ding on it. And then my motor drive seemed fine. So I never worked with insurance companies. I had insurance through my father. I didn't really know the ins and out of it. And when the insurance guy was asking me, what do I need to replace? I said, well, my motor drive's fine. I just need a camera. Well, so then this was in January of '83. I got my new camera. My lens was fine. My motor drive seemed fine. So I started shooting. That's right when the El Nino swell started to hit. So I went through 13 rolls of film because it was all happening back to back so fast. I wasn't taking film in to get developed. So I wasn't seeing my results. I was just, as soon as I'd shoot, I'd put it up on this shelf in my room and I'd go shoot more. And I went through 13 rolls of some of the best sand spit of Tommy, Pitus, one of the absolute best days in the Cove at Rincon. To this day, I haven't seen a day come close to this. Santa Clara, just everything. And what had happened is the motor drive was broken from the fall, even though it didn't physically look it, and it wasn't advancing the film. So out of 13 rolls, there was one or two shots in each roll that was developed, and the rest didn't even get exposed to light. And so a big part of that El Nino, when it was happening, I don't even have shots. And a lot of the shots, to give you an example how much good imagery I missed, normally if you have 36 shots in a row, you're lucky if you get 80% of them in focus, because we haven't even talked about that follow focusing when you didn't have, when the camera didn't autofocus, you had to do it yourself. It was extremely difficult. And so 80% was a really good rate of getting things in focus. And then out of that 80%, you have maybe at the most 5 images that are good, and if you're lucky, one that's a keeper. Well, out of the 13 rolls of some having no images, and then some only having at the most 2 images, or 3 or 4, I would say out of those, let's say out of those 13 rolls, I had 10 usable images that were exposed, period. All 10 of those are probably in the book. It was that good. And so the amount of imagery that I didn't get is just to this day, it just makes me feel awful thinking about it. So all those images for that 83 part of the book are without some of the best shots, I think, if that makes sense.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, no, that's a photographer story. I don't know if you don't shoot, whatever.
Okay, just because we haven't touched on Davey Miller, and he's just an amazing person and surfer. What was going on with him back then?
So when I first started, so the first time I went to Santa Clara, it was a friend. I was a friend from North County, Santa Barbara, and he was actually the person saying, "I know where it's 6 to 8 feet going off right now." He goes, "But we can't surf there." So because it was real localized. So he said, "I'll take you there, but we can't bring our boards." So we went there, and by the time we got to Santa Clara, the wind had already come up a bit. And sure enough, it was like 6 to 8 feet, just kegs going off. But it was windblown. There's nobody out. Well, that kind of, like, not being able to surf there thing with Santa Clara kind of ended right about then, just coincidentally. And it pretty much from that point on was down at Hollywood, maybe Oxnard Shores a little bit, but Santa Clara pretty much became no man's land. And the first time, and I'll get to David Miller in a second, but the first time I talk about the Daydreams in the book with Willie Morris and Sam Matt George and everything, that was the first time that I shot at Santa Clara, and then I would start going back to Santa Clara with Willie after that. And we never caught it like the Daydreams, but you got millions of days with Willie and Tommy, just an unbelievable surf there. Back then the sandbars were so much better because they would dredge the harbor. They would deposit all that clay muck on the beach, and then that would get out in the water and make the sandbars really abrupt and strong, and they'd last. Because they're, a composite of not just sand that would move around after one strong, swell. And they would stay there. And the river mouth was managed different. Somebody told me the power plant manages it now, and they do it different, so you don't get that one little stream, that you don't get the estuary building up where they had to burst open the sandbar and let that one little stream go out every so often, building this insane like sandbar. It's all different now. So you have the ingredients, but you're not using it the same way they did back then. So with all that said, it was a whole different break back then. And since I've been shooting in 2017, I haven't shot there once since then. I've seen it where it had size. I've seen it where it's the only place that waves were hitting. They weren't hitting up down the coast, or they weren't hitting up in the Santa Barbara area, but they still didn't have the form and shape they had back in the old days. So we started to surf there. It was really good. Davey Miller was one of the first guys I ran into, and he was not pro at that point, and he did not like shooting on the beach. And that's one of the times Willie came up and that I was telling you about earlier. But all within the course of the year, everything changed, and he completely, got into getting photographed and being, published, and so I kind of shot him. I was able to shoot him. We weren't able to shoot much because I was always shooting with Tommy, and he was in Ventura. Ventura, but I did shoot him enough, and it was all part of this when he went to Hawaii and did that campaign at Pipeline and stuff. That was pretty phenomenal. So this all predates that campaign, his Hawaiian, what I would call his Hawaiian campaign a bit. On the really big days that I was shooting Ventura, I was always down at Clara, and him and his crew were always up at C Street and stuff. Yeah, okay, so switch channels. Yeah, no, Davey Smith, it's a whole other story. Davey never sought recognition. I think like Tommy, he wanted to be recognized for what he does well, but he doesn't want all the adoration and, to be put up on a pedestal. And you asked earlier, how was Tommy different then than now? It was all new and exciting back then. I think maybe if Tommy was turned off by anything, it was like, not just getting credit for what he was good at, but kind of put up on this pedestal. And he's not comfortable that way, nor was Davey. But Davey didn't go the route of being, he wasn't a contest surfer. He did surf in contests, don't get me wrong. But that, Tommy was just so competitive in contests, on top of being as good as he was. And so to see really good Davey, to see what Davey Smith was all about, you had to, it couldn't be at a contest. It wasn't going to be in front of 1,000 cameras. It wasn't going to be in front of any cameras. It was going to be, in Santa Barbara, it was going to be at the pit at Hendry's Beach, or what he lived for was going to Alama. And because it was a big left, and Davey was goofy. But Davey's surfing was so phenomenal, and he was so, you think about some of these guys like Dane Reynolds and the guys that are just so phenomenal at doing airs and different kind of stuff. That's the way Davey was. But he was that before many people were like that, doing stuff before it was scripted. And doing it on boards that don't even come close to what the boards are today. You could talk to 20 people and get 20 different answers on who did the first air. I kind of spell out how I understand it in my book, and Davey's first photograph, him doing his first air, was in 1975. Bob Barber, famous surf photographer that worked for surfing from Santa Cruz, took it at Rocky Point, I think. But by 1980, 81, Matt Keckley, Kevin Reed were doing airs, but the success rate was very limited. It hadn't been captured. The full air and landing had not been captured, and so working with Davey, the goal was to catch him doing an air and completing it. And and you would see photos in the magazines back then. And I talked to Jeff Devine about it once. They were putting photos that they knew the guy was flying in the air and was going to just come apart from his board midair and never had a chance of landing it. But they put it in the magazines to kind of get people, that helped the progression in the thinking. But there was a race, so to speak, like a space race, to get the completed, the landed air, and eventually Davey and I got it, and it was in at that time Surfer magazine, which was the end all of surfing. Surfer and Surfing magazine were, and Surfer had this section in their magazine called Tips, and it was a how to do a maneuver. And so the first completed air was of Davey, and it showed up in the Tips, and so that was pretty cool. But Davey was doing all kinds of things. Freaky things. Things, if I explained it to you, it doesn't even make sense. He had this one thing where he'd take off on a wave. You always had to wait for the right waves. He was trying to do. I have shots of him trying to do barrel rolls, and the physics of doing the maneuvers is hard enough. But first you have to find the right wave to be able to do it. But he had this one maneuver where he would tumble. He would take off, and and stand up on his board, grab his rail, and then tumble down the wave on his back and then back on his board and hit the bottom and then do a bottom turn.
What?
There's so many things I never caught on film that now you're sitting there thinking like, okay, he's not going to do anything. Remember, you had to conserve film back then. You couldn't shoot anything. You had to wait for, you had to anticipate the peak moments and shoot them. Whereas now you just basically leave your finger down and shoot the whole wave. Back then you had to conserve. And so the amount of things that he did that I did not anticipate were going to be done. You know, when you learn the surfer style, you anticipate. Well, back then, Davey was doing things never done before, and there was no way to anticipate it. And so I just sit there, you know, with my camera in my hand or on the tripod, having just watched him do something, and I can remember that you just shake your head like, did I just see that? You know, and you look around to see if somebody else saw it. And it was literally like, well, that probably didn't happen. You know, but no, that did happen. You know, it's that surreal kind of thing where you can't believe what you just saw. And that's the way it was with the first airs too. And it was funny when you would show up at a beach and Davey would go out surfing, and those first, you know, the first year or so when he was working on the airs, and he would do one, and there'd be a couple of people on the beach. Listening to their reaction was like phenomenal. I've said this before. It's like watching somebody do 4 flips and land, you know, nowadays. You just be, you know, everybody be screaming and blown away. That's the way watching the air. And they're fairly crude airs. You know, they weren't anything like what's being done now with the height and the twist and all the different, you know, type of airs you could do. It was basically just a basic air. You know, I think the biggest thing that had to be learned back then that I didn't really understand is how to take off. You couldn't just take off like an off the lip and throw your board out like an off the lip back, you know, back weighted on the tail and swing it back around. Is you'd separate. You had to be more up on the nose or on top of your board. Now I've seen it guys do it. I've seen guys, you know, do it like they're doing an off the lip. It's just the boards are so light and they're so quick and it's so rehearsed and practiced now. But back then you had the trick to finally learning how to land the air was to be on top of your board as you took off from and left the wave face. And so that all sounds pretty rudimentary, but back then, you know, Davey was figuring it out, you know, along with guys like Matt Keckley and Kevin Reed for the first time. So that whole Davey, so being a photographer and shooting an area that basically was not really printed much except for Steve Bissell shots and several guys. Hugland was filming, and Don Balch and a few other guys were filming more lineup scenic shots, but then all of a sudden show up in an area that didn't have much more exposure in the magazines than that, and all of a sudden being at the beginning of shooting Tommy and the aerials with Davey. That was a pretty incredible thing, and it was incredible at the time. It's not like you look back and say it was incredible. It was pretty incredible as it was the progression and how fast it was happening at that time. And I hope that comes across in the book. I hope you can see that in the book. And the fact that I was from Texas, and even though I started surfing when I was 7, I had traveled around the world surfing, and I was a really good surfer. I still didn't understand how the surf world worked because, you know, you're talking about being in the backwoods. Being a surfer at that time from Texas, you were really in the backwoods. You knew a lot about Mexico because that's where Texas surfers travel to get real waves. But you didn't know the surf industry and the surf scene, and you just saw it in the magazines and you filled in the spaces. And all of a sudden to be in the middle of all that, coming from such a deprived area of all that, really, you know, made it where it was that much more of a mission for me to do and that much more exciting for me. And I hope that comes across in the book too.
It definitely does. And you captured a magical time. You were there during a magical time. You were shot on film, real film, which I think makes it even more special. And where's the best place to get this book? How do we get a signed copy of this bad boy?
The signed copy, you can order from me on my website. It's jimmymetyko gallery.com. You can follow me on Instagram, jimmymetyko.gallery. It's published by Rizzoli. Rizzoli's a great big cool publishing company, and they are on all the platforms.
Thanks so much for being on the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it.
You can tell once I get going, I start talking too much, and you got to shut me up. But I appreciate listening and allowing me the opportunity.
Cool, man. Well, thanks again.
Hey, Josh, I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me, and look forward to seeing you.